Good evening. We're at the monastery this evening. I've decided to come in here because we like it here. So here we are. I have a few monastery residents that are off in the dissonance, hiding behind bushes and trees and rocks. So they're safe from me breathing on them. Is there 6 people here besides myself and who knew on myself? What?
Just wondering if they can hear us.
Can you hear me all right? Can, okay. So I have a fan running here. That's why Unya was asking me. So this evening's Dharma talk is titled Beyond Comfort. And that title just kind of leapt off the pages of the New York Times. Not actually, came from somewhere else. Actually, it's words of Trungpa Rinpoche. And the idea there is not that you can't make yourself comfortable or snuggle up or whatever, be cozy, but just that the constant looking for something else quite often has to do with having some kind of a feeling of being out of sorts or uncomfortable or basically suffering on some level or another. And as a meditator, as someone who is practicing the Buddha's Dharma, studying the Buddha's Dharma, you might want to look at that when you begin to move away from one thing into another and look at the motivation there, look at the motivation to get away from something. Because actually you're getting away from something you might want to take a close look at, which would be your preference for something. So the idea here, beyond comfort, I don't know if I would use his words. I just thought that was that you could actually function beyond the necessity for comfort, which is what I think he was referring to, or possibly. This doesn't mean that we go the other direction and try to go into difficult situations. This is something that the Buddha did, as far as we know, went into very difficult situations, not eating, sitting on rocks, going without clothing, going without food, and so on for long periods of time, kind of forcing the whole thing of suffering, trying to see if by being very deliberate about the suffering or discontent or the lack of comfort that he could possibly bring up some kind of deeper understanding of what suffering was and what that was about. Perhaps he could, perhaps he did. Perhaps without doing that, we might not have the Buddha. I have no idea. And there's no way to have any guesswork around that particularly. But what we can do with our own situation is look at the need for something else. So when there's discomfort on some level or another, it's just the simplest movement will take you away from the difficulty. It will take you away from the difficulty that it might be a good idea for you to actually look deeply into its arising. If it's arising, probably necessary for you to see what that is. Most people are in the world with a more materialistic or worldly Dharma approach, are looking for ways to feel better, ways to be happier, ways to get past the difficulty of what arises in our mind stream. And I'm sure you all know that sometimes what is arising in the mind stream doesn't seem to have any source. It doesn't seem to have any producer. It doesn't seem to have anyone doing that. This is a little bit of a clue to you. It's just a little bit of a clue that there is no producer. No one produces it. There's no being producing anything. But it's very difficult for us to have an emotion, a feeling, without some kind of reference, some kind of well, I'm depressed, or well, it's because of this, it's because I'm eating the wrong food, and it's not that relative situation doesn't have some relative truth to it. It's just that if you go in that direction, that's what you get, relative truth. And as you've heard me say 150 times, circles. Circles are circles. The idea here would be that you, in your mind stream, in your daily life, in your interaction with your friends, your mates, your coworkers, your family, your sangha, can be very challenging to do anything other than receive. Maybe not initially, maybe not at that moment. But insofar as we can, it is a good idea to receive whatever is occurring. And you might notice the discomfort. You might notice that it's not comfortable. But to do anything with that tends to show up as a kind of ignoring that is, well, let's put it this way. It certainly isn't being with all things, which is one of the 3 pure precepts. Do good, don't do harm, simply put, and be with all things. So whatever's occurring, please just look at that. And if you can, don't add. But if you do add, then just look at that. Just look at the addition. Don't add to the addition like I shouldn't be adding. So when CTR says beyond comfort, it's functioning in such a way that comfort isn't particularly something that you're looking for. That you could say you're beyond that. You're functioning in a way that whatever's arising, just observe. It might even come to the point where there is no conclusion about what's arising, that you can't really tell whether this is pleasurable or painful. We're not talking about sadism, masochism, or some other kind of insanity. Just talking about the very nerve endings that arise as sensation. The ones that are the most, the easiest to see, of course, are the 5 sense consciousnesses. Objects there are very relative and very, very easy to see. In the mind stream, it's much different. It is much more subtle. So whatever's arising in the mind stream, observe. The other way of saying it is just receive that. Whatever's coming, receive it. And if any production needs to happen in terms of judging or concluding or analyzing, then that will come out of the open dimension of your consciousness, of your awareness, of your prajna. So what happens quite often is when we move toward comfort, it might look like a very simple, harmless thing that we're doing, but there's a lot of aggression there. There's a lot of aggression showing up around that is about pushing away from something to get to something else. Quite often, all we see is where we're going, just to I need to be comfortable. So we don't really see the aggression. We don't see the ignoring that is happening there. And that ignoring and that aggression is a part of the 3 poisons. It's 2 of them. The other one is, I want to be comfortable. I need to be comfortable, whether it's curling up on the day bed or whether it's some other kind of wish for pleasure. So it's always about awareness. It's never about accomplishing anything in particular. So the rate or the speed or maybe lack of speed at which you're understanding this in your own mind stream so that you can take the energy or stop fueling that aspect of the mind that wants something else. The very nature of what the Buddha said in the Four Noble Truths, wanting things to be different than they are. If this is a dry talk, it's probably because I don't have any interesting questions yet. Yes, sir. Young man over there in the third row. We finally have a young man in the room. Go ahead.
In my situation, I can see that I'm constantly reaching out for that comfort, but thinking of your teaching of to not do anything with that, is there a time that should stop?
So simplify the question so I can repeat it so people can hear.
If we can see that we're still, or that we're always reaching out,
If we can see that we're always reaching out,
should we back off?
so I wouldn't do it as some kind of a struggle or a push or pull. It might be good to actually watch that aspect of your mind and get pretty familiar with that, get to know yourself on that level. And if you have a strong awareness practice, then that's going to be more apparent. And the way you'll know that's more apparent because of the nature of the ego or the self-centeredness or narcissism, not going to be comfortable. So it's not going to particularly feel like some kind of a discovery. It might just feel like just raw negativity. So you might want to do that some, but I wouldn't follow it up with some kind of philosophy as I'm just getting to know myself kind of story. If there's no story, and if you're able to just allow yourself to just hang out in an open dimension where there's no reference point particularly, there's just the raw feeling of being uncomfortable, then it's probably appropriate to continue in the way you're asking about. I think. Yes.
What should we do if the story is there?
So if the story is there, then there may be some area or quite a bit of it where you might just be watching the story, not validating it, not justifying it, no further comment on it, just watch that there's a story there. Even to say there's a story there, you've actually left what's happening for some kind of a mini, very slight film of congratulations. So if you're just perceiving it, and there's no validation or no further judgment about that, and the way that will feel is like you probably will feel kind of helpless because there's no knowing what to do next. That will come up more and more. The more you practice sitting practice of meditation, the stronger the awareness becomes, and the more vivid and high relief the ego, the actual, I'm going to say it very bluntly, kind of disgusting part of the narcissism. It's kind of just irritating to see how completely convoluted we are and how wrapped up we are in our own desire for wanting this, not wanting that. And we're going to have to do some of that. We're going to have to actually look at that aspect of one's mind more.
Not yet, thank you.
Sokuzan.
The other night I was asking you about right and wrong and how it's kind of beside the point when there's maybe a disagreement. And I was wondering, what is the Bodhisattva Vow? Or how do we put the Bodhisattva Vow before the comfort of being correct?
So I think it's going to happen in different level with different people, but the idea is putting others before yourself, which is the obvious way of talking about it. So I can't comment on some kind of strategy you can use. Can you change the question a little bit so I can respond in a relative way?
There's a lot of controversy in the world right now around the coronavirus, Black Lives Matter,
Yes.
politics, and we all think we have the evidence to support our views.
Yes.
What is the Bodhisattva Vow, or what is it
No,
to be a
yeah.
Bodhisattva?
No view. No view. No selection. No. This doesn't mean that you won't go through that door and that door. It doesn't mean you won't wear this mask. Just like I did coming in here, and I'm taking it off to talk. You're wearing a mask. Everyone in here is wearing a mask, other than me and Unyo. But it doesn't mean you're not going to do that. But You can do this without having any opinion about it. Like everybody should wear a mask. This doesn't mean everyone shouldn't wear a mask. It's just that it's that quality of it's kind of a mini form of congratulations that well, at least I'm doing. Well, at least I'm more about that. Help me with this.
Those feelings are some of the most overwhelming feelings because there's a sense of self-righteousness around it.
There is.
So how do we begin to glimpse through the obviousness of our thoughts, where they feel obvious? Like, of course I'm right. Of course this is true. How do we begin to have any room to breathe around that?
You might not have.
Would we have to just function in ignorance at that point then?
It's not exactly ignorance if the way you're talking about it. That isn't exactly ignorance. It's just wanting more, wanting something else. Whatever's arising is it. And if there's some kind of a bias about me and what I want and what should happen or what shouldn't happen or what other people are doing, what I'm doing, any kind of structure that's showing up like that, it's contagious. I mean, it's just we want this, we don't want that. Just like when we have our COVID meetings on Fridays, those of you who join. So it's about awareness. If we think it's about right and wrong, then it's going to be difficult. This doesn't mean, like I said, wear one of these. The conclusions about things are not exactly the same as putting on a mask. When you everything you hear and everything you see sounds like that's something you should do.
When we're still lacking in that type of clarity that allows us to see what's arising, clearly, how do we guide our actions?
Stay in bed. Well, you could do less, but observe more of what is happening, what your environment is, what's happening with you in relationship to, in this situation of being living in the monastery, and the relationships you have with a few people, with several people, if you include Zoom and everything else that's going on, is to observe as much as possible and function in the particular form that we have here, which is a pretty strong form considering.
Sometimes you say less is better.
I do.
Can less communication be better?
Less of what you think is communication can be. Actual communication isn't necessarily words, or isn't necessarily having some information that you transmit from your thinking process over to someone else and getting some kind of, oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, we should do this or do that. We shouldn't do this. Not that I don't want to take that out of it, but the fundamental understanding of it seems to be much deeper than just the words or the message or the information that's going from one person to another. More?
Not yet.
Anyone on Zoom have a question, or on? Is there a way that they can talk on YouTube?
Colin Bowen, just maybe
Yes.
to comment that I don't know if anybody else had trouble hearing questions, and I know you guys got masks on, but we could hear Chazon's a little bit, but I couldn't hear Shoto.
Okay, well, I'll try to repeat. I thought I repeated a little bit, but I probably didn't repeat the whole thing. Thanks, Sokuzan. I'll try to repeat what they asked.
And I do have a question.
Go ahead. You need to speak up too, though.
Do I? Can you hear me?
No, can't hear you. Speak up.
Can you hear me now?
Only one person stuck their thumb up. Two people. Oh, 3, 4, 5. Okay, yeah, you're good. Anybody in here? Can you hear what she's saying? They went like this. That's like a bundle of thumbs.
I got this new mic that was recommended by you guys down there.
All right. Well, then you're good. Then go ahead and ask your question if you have one.
There's a feeling that's super intense, and just the raw quality of it. You might not even be able to say if it's good or bad or describe it, but it feels so intense that you can hardly stand it.
Yes.
Is there a way to, you can't run from yourself. Is there a way to cool that down without shutting down on it?
But, the way you're asking it, is there a way to cool intense feelings or emotions down, cool them down without shutting down on them?
I guess like a pressure valve. Is there any way to release some of that pressure? You're about to jump into something bad.
You're about to jump to something bad. Okay.
You know.
Everybody hear that? So, I think it's so situational. But there's no particular protocol for that I could say, everybody should do this, everybody should do that. So I think each person would have to look at whatever they need to do. And I would say less is better, but don't explode. Don't want your head to blow off or something. So there might need to be some kind of a release or some kind of something you would do to cut into that. And, for some people, it may be go sit down, look at the wall. For someone else, it may be go out and go for a walk. For someone else, if it's in a relationship, if it's being triggered or being fueled by your interaction with another person, it may be good to just say, excuse me, I need to go do something else. I need to leave or whatever. So you may need to just disconnect from it. And I wouldn't hesitate to do that. That's not necessarily seeking comfort particularly. I mean, it might be so intense that you're not looking for comfort. You're just working with something that looks like it could get explosive if you keep going. If I'm understanding what you're asking about.
Well, yeah, I guess the question was inspired not necessarily to seek comfort, but that you are at your limit. I mean, it's not like you're going to explode, but it's easy to talk about. But when you're in the middle of it, it feels intense.
Well, I don't think other people are having that kind of feeling. Sorry. Everybody here has a mask on, and so except Unyo, and so everybody else just looks like they're not happy, and Unyo's smiling. So, but if you know American Sign Language, then it's this, right? Yeah. That means smiling. So everybody's smiling. Now they're all smiling. Very good. So again, going back to what you're asking about, I think it's I think that I feel that if you're training your mind, if you're spending some time watching what's coming and going in your mind, and watching the negativity come up, watching the positivity come up, watching the positivity change to negative, watching the negative change to positive, and so forth, with all the stories that come up in our mind stream, whether you're doing sitting meditation or not, but particularly if you're doing sitting meditation, if you can just watch what's happening there, then to say it very directly, your ability to actually witness negativity without fluffing it up, without tamping it down, or without meddling with it is going to get stronger over time. That doesn't mean that when you get into certain kind of situations where you're feeling really pressured, that you're going to be able to meditate your way out of it, or your powerful meditation awareness will save the day, so to speak. So there's no guarantee of any of that. It's with each person, the causes and conditions that arise as passion, aggression, and ignorance. Self-centeredness functions very differently with each person. Some people are actually teaching meditation that are extremely self-centered. Other people are not particularly self-centered, but they don't even know about meditation, and they're not interested because they're already not particularly unhappy about anything. Very interesting area for human beings. Further questions? Shoka.
When we're talking about discomfort that arises through one of the sense doors or the thoughts or the emotions, is the discomfort that's arising different with each of the sense doors?
So Shoka's asking, you can't hear him, I suppose. Can you? You hear him? Yeah. Probably not. So he's asking if it's with each one of the sense doors or sense fields, if it is different. Are you asking is the consciousness different, or what is it you're asking about?
Okay. Is there a basic discomfort that is triggered through the different senses, or through thoughts or emotions?
So the mind is the one that meddles with everything. It won't leave the sense of sight alone. It has to comment on everything. It won't leave the sense of smell alone, or the other discrete senses that have their own objects, a fragrance or a smell or odor or a sense of touch. It has to comment on everything. So those are talked about separately, but they're fundamentally all the thinking process is always participating in all of those. And so, yes, you could have a difference in different ones, but there's still consciousness. The objects that are showing up just have a different speed or frequency, or however you want to say it. More.
What is the basic discomfort that we're trying to get away from?
It's just life of suffering. Existence is suffering. It's not pessimism. It's just true. There's some kind of basic discontent that's occurring on some level all the time.
If we see what that discontent is,
Yes.
will we still be or experience discontent?
If you see what discontent is, you may experience discontent, but you won't call it that necessarily. You won't separate it out into something separate from something else. So the selectivity part of the consciousness is losing its belief, disbelief, propaganda. More?
No, thank you.
Sokuzan.
How can we see if we're subjecting ourselves to discomfort as opposed to receiving discomfort that's already the case?
I think that happens in each person's mind stream. You'll be just that you're asking a question would say that you're looking at that aspect of it. You're beginning to look into whether you're separating things out and evaluating one thing as being different from something else. There's a kind of discriminating awareness that is not about saying good or bad or right or wrong, but it's just about seeing the boundaries between things. So there's no, we aren't finding, oh, this is good, this should be happening. Oh, this other situation is not so good, should not be happening. Is that what you're asking me about? Or is there more specific?
I think so. I think that's the area.
More?
If discomfort is showing up, should we just receive it?
Yes, whatever is showing up, just receive. And if you can, with no particular comment. But if you make a comment, then don't comment on the comment. Don't keep stacking things up. And if you do keep stacking things up, then just be aware of that, but don't go in and try to repair that or cut into it with some kind of promotional material. In other words, to try to get yourself to do something else. Now, there are people who teach that way. Will even give you techniques for reducing this and modifying this. I just don't do it. More? Junchu.
Couple of questions from YouTube.
Yes, YouTube questions. Go ahead.
Raphael in New York.
Raphael.
Sometimes spiritual practice itself becomes a source of comfort and security for me, and I feel that at times I worry that the sense of comfort means I'm not looking at something. How can I tell if I'm too comfortable in my daily practice?
How can I tell if I'm too comfortable in my daily practice? Or Raphael says that sometimes a spiritual path becomes supportive, or it feels like he feels so good. It must not be the spiritual path. That kind of thing is what I'm getting from it. And I would say, don't worry about it. You want to worry about something? I'll give you something to worry about. Train your mind. Sit still a lot. Do a lot of it. A lot of it. If you want to talk to me personally about it, I'd be happy to do that. But I can say sit a lot. It seems to take a lot of sitting still and doing nothing but watching what continues to have a momentum. Sit down, hold still, hold the body very still, sit in a symmetrical posture, and look at how you don't want to do that. The mind is actually moving. What is the title of the talk? Beyond comfort. We're comfortable, fooling around and leaning on our kotsu, looking through the drawers to see if we can find some 50 cents so we can go and get an ice cream. So in other words, just fooling around. But if you sit down, sit like this, and sit like that for an hour or two, or 3 or 4, you're going to run right into your need for comfort, your need for solace, your need for reassurance that you're here in a body-mind complex and you're keeping away from the bad things and getting the good things. So we're not saying go the other direction and torture yourself like the Buddha did 2,500 years ago, trying to figure out what's the nature of suffering? What is the nature of impermanence? What is death? Death comes without warning. So I would say, first of all, and second of all, third of all, don't worry about it, and don't worry about it, and don't worry about it. But train your mind. And don't worry about that either, but find some time to sit down, hold still, and watch the need for something else. Watch that you're uncomfortable, but since you're not doing anything about it, you're beginning to understand what the title of this talk is about. What is the title of this talk? Does anybody remember? Beyond comfort. Junshu.
A question from Biyun.
Biyun.
Where
have you been, Biyun?
What is the essence of communication?
Stay in touch with me. That's the essence of it. The essence of communication is presence. Be present. The whole world is talking to you all the time, as it has been said in the tradition long before this old man showed up. A long time ago, is everything is preaching the Buddha's Dharma. And what is it saying? Not separate, not separate, not separate. Not everywhere you look, anything you look at, it's not something else. It's not something else. And you're so clear about this. You're so clear about it that you won't do something that I did when I was very young. I thought everything belonged to me. So I was a thief. It was a misunderstanding. And now I see what? Everything does belong to me, and it's exactly where it needs to be. Not separate. Everything is not, you can't find anything that's separate. When I say not separate from the consciousness which is receiving that, whatever that is, that sight, that smell, that taste, that touch, that thought, not separate. Yes, sir.
What is it about doing nothing that's so uncomfortable?
About meditation? Boring?
Or even like holding still here, like if I weren't fidgeting, it's kind of hard.
No. What is it that's so uncomfortable about that? Can I have a minute? Suffering. Suffering. Everything is suffering, and if you continue to move, then that you're able to cover that up. All the adjustment. Any kind of movement. If you watch when somebody is talking, the very movement, like the way I'm moving my hands, it's a cover up. I mean, it's also an expression. You could say that too. You could say dancing is a cover up. You could say drawing pictures is a cover up. You could say writing detective novels is a cover up. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's about awareness. It's not about what you do or don't do. But in order to understand that, to know that, we may have to slow down. We may have to cut into that speediness and pull still. And as has been said in the tradition, return to our original nature. which is not separate from awakening or Buddha nature. More?
The Four Noble Truths are coming up, and I'm wondering, with the way that you're talking about it, is it less about ending suffering and more about seeing how suffering works?
To go directly to the point, it's more about saying there's no one who's suffering. Suffering is there, but there's no being. There's no identity, no separate identity that is suffering. It's called egolessness, or no self, no other, non-duality. It's a very simple teaching. It shows up in other traditions besides Buddha Dharma. But it has to be seen. It's not something you know or think or believe in. You see it. And the feeling of seeing it isn't the same thing as having knowledge about how to make cheesecake. It's not that kind of a materialistic kind of idea. It's more like not knowing anything. Yes.
Is there comfort in the cessation of the sufferer?
The difference between pleasure and pain are not. They're very similar. They don't have the polarity that they had. It's just things just arise in that consciousness or in that space. Maybe suffering, maybe pleasure. More?
Are seeing the truth and being happy different fruitions?
I'm going to repeat that one if I can. Are seeing the truth. Is that it? And what's the next one?
And being happy.
And being happy, different fruitions. Yeah. Seeing the truth isn't happiness. The way you're asking about it is a relative thing that comes and goes. If you're happy, it's going to go away. If you're miserable, it's going to go away. Nothing lasts. But seeing the truth doesn't go away. Anyone else have a question that I can struggle with answering? You have one?
Smile.
I should smile.
No, I smile.
Oh, you smile. Shoka smiled. No one else is smiling. Is there another question from either on YouTube? I think there's a dozen people on YouTube, and there's a few more than that on Zoom.
Kevin bowing.
Yes, Kevin.
So if we're looking at the way that suffering interacts with an apparent self, when that apparent self is seen through, does the suffering end? Bowing.
Not in the relative sense like you no longer suffer. It's just that the way one understands that situation is different. And so it's no longer an issue. One is no longer concerned about one's suffering. It's like, I'm not saying you're dismissive, you don't give a damn anymore, but it's understood as not being separate from everything else that's occurring. So everything is happening. Life is suffering. The cause is wanting things to be different than they are. That kind of suffering changes its shape. I would say there's still something there, but there's no identity that has an issue with that. There's no one who's trying to stop that or get rid of it or more.
Would another way of saying that be that the suffering doesn't have anything to land on or stick to?
Yeah, you could use that kind of it comes and goes, things come and go. You just notice phenomena comes and appears and then it goes away, appears, goes impermanence. But there's no The image I sometimes use is like an empty house with no windows, no doors, that the wind just blows through it, but it can't find anything can't locate anything.
Kevin bowing, and since we're kind of looking at the Four Noble Truths adjacent to this, a notion of beyond comfort. I know you don't really teach the Eightfold Path per se, so how do the precepts help us go beyond comfort? Bowing.
So I think, first of all, it helps us using those, in our tradition, the 16 precepts to look at lots of different aspects of the way difficulty or challenges or suffering or self-centeredness or other-centeredness show up in our life, and just ways of working with it, leveraging the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the 3 jewels, the 3 pure precepts, the 10 prohibitory precepts of don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't say things that don't gossip, and don't abuse others, and don't get mad, and don't abuse the 3 treasures. So they're just relative ways of bringing us, using we have an awareness practice going. So then maybe one of those or 2 of those or maybe 5 of them will be areas that would really help us to look more closely into our self-centeredness, into what, as it says in Teach the 7 Points of Mind training, work on the greatest defilements first. If there's some area of your mind, if you have a lot of jealousy problems, or if you have a lot of anger, or if you have a lot of irritation with the way other people act, other people are functioning and you're irritated by it, or other people have things that you don't have, or are getting things that you don't have. So it's just a way of working with it that uses the conceptual structure, because that's the easiest way to remind us, yes, we're having some difficulty with this or that or some other aspect of it. Could be as simple as just trying to be with all things, trying to be with the very emotions that come up that want to drag you into some kind of an artificial temporary comfort zone, so you don't feel uncomfortable, rather than maybe spend some time in that area and just let's see what this is deeply. Let's bring this to the cushion, is one way of, has been said. Bring it to your awareness practice. Sometimes, depending on who it is, I don't do this generally, but specifically, sometimes I tell someone, get an index card and write whatever that key word is, that reminder is, and put it down, and then sit for an hour. But maybe the last 10 minutes or so, just look at that concept there and bring yourself into that conceptual reference point and see if that will open something up. You might have to do quite a bit of it. Just a way of talking about it. It's a way of combining the sitting practice of meditation, which is sharpening the blade, and then at some point towards the end of that, you actually cut into something. And it can be conceptual. It can be jealousy or remorse or pride or any of those. You can use any of those images or any of those reference. Junshu.
Question from Tom McCauley.
From who?
Tom McCauley.
Tom?
Is there any drawback to mixing different meditation styles? Will self-transcending or Vipassana style interfere with awareness, even if you do a lot of just precisely this?
I don't know. For sure, it could happen lots of different ways. But the way it looks to me, since you're asking me, I would say don't mix them up. If you want to practice Vipassana, do it for 10 years. You could, if you feel drawn to that, then do that practice. It's not wrong to do another kind of, or if you feel drawn to tantric practices, maybe you need to find a lama to talk to. So I'm not saying that, I'm not going to talk you out of that. If you need to do what I'm teaching, you'll know it. And if you have doubts about it, maybe you should be doing something else. But if you're going to do Shikantaza, I would give it a few years without mixing, because if you bring Vipassana techniques are very powerful. but they tend to isolate an identity. And if you're doing Vipassana, it can feel very, very good to do that kind of practice. Talk to somebody who's done a lot of Vipassana. But at some point, if somebody does enough of that, eventually we start to get into that at the edge of the cliff where it feels pretty good for a long time when you first start. But it can be difficult, or not. I don't know. I mean, S.N. Goenka, who taught Vipassana to inmates in the prisons in India, helped those people a lot. Well, of course, look at the contrast between what they were doing in the prison and suddenly they're sitting down doing nothing but having their eyes closed and scanning their body situation. Quite a contrast. So they're bound to feel better, but it's a relative feeling better. And what Shikantaza is not a relative feeling better. It's actually going beyond comfort. And how do you do that? You have to look at how uncomfortable you are and do nothing about it. This doesn't mean you don't take an aspirin if you have a headache. I'm not being silly about it. I'm saying you're willing to sit down. It's been called way before I got here, but voluntary suffering. Sit down, hold still, and look at the discomfort, the suffering, and the way I've said it in this talk title is beyond. Go beyond that. Is there a beyond to that? Is the suffering the beyond? What is it? Find out. Each person here and here, we have to see it ourselves. And it's not a conclusion. If you have conclusions, then that's a not. Conclusions are not. Buddhism is right, a not. I've attained awakening. It's a not. But also, I'm confused and I'm disturbed. It's also a not. Look closely. And so I would say, to be more clear, maybe a little bit more clear about that, is you should trust yourself. If you're doing Vipassana, or just do Vipassana. It's like, ice cream is good and ketchup is good, but together don't work so well. So do Vipassana, or you could do Vipassana for a few months and then do Shikantaza for a few months. That might be a good practice. And I have had some students that have been Vipassana practitioners. You know who you are. It's not incorrect to do Vipassana. It's just I don't promote that insofar as I even understand it. Yes.
Joseph in Kalamazoo. I recently saw a Dr. King quote on a Black Lives Matter yard sign that said, "There comes a time when silence is betrayed. How might avoidance be mistaken for observation?"
So, I don't know if I can repeat that, but Joseph in Kalamazoo saw a Dr. King, Martin Luther King yard sign that said, sometimes, so I need to repeat this or I can't, it's not going to make any sense to anybody.
There comes a time when silence is betrayal.
There comes a time when silence is betrayal. So you have to consider where this is coming from. I'm not disagreeing with that, but this is a man who was living in the 1960s, who was a crusader for Black people. And he was working with intense relative truth where he didn't have any other approach to it. And he was also, his spiritual orientation had a different dynamic going on. Not wrong, just different. So people are using that because they are trying to mobilize people to join their cause, or however you want to say, to put it simply. This is without any disrespect. Not disrespecting people, but not everybody needs to be talking. There are a lot of talking going on right now. Some people, a few dozen of us might want to sit down and shut up and watch what moves. Somebody's got to train their mind. Somebody has to actually sit down and be what this is, rather than trying to join the relative dynamic. There's a lot of room for questions there if you have them. Very easy to get drawn into other dynamics. There's all kinds of agendas, and you all know, you know what I'm saying. But right or wrong it tends to make it confusing. Like when someone says, that would be like me saying, there comes a time when not training your mind is wrong or insanity. Or everybody should train their mind. Be very careful about stepping into anyone else's karma. This is a vast dimension. This, I'm going to be 80 pretty soon. That's nothing. 80 years old is nothing compared to billions and billions of countless chillicosms, as it's called in Buddhism. Buddhism is aware of the vastness of all the worlds that come and go, as is Brahmanism, Hinduism. Go ahead, please.
Just a minute ago, you said that some of us need to sit down.
Drop your mask a little bit so I can hear you.
You said that some of us need to sit down and eat. Did you say eat what this is or see what this is?
Take your pick. Some of us need to sit down, and that's what we're doing. That's what I teach. Find out who you are before you take the unexamined person full of passion, aggression, and ignorance out into the world and get stirred up by the otherness that is out there. AK-47s in Lansing, people in front of police looking like this. It's not going to be helpful to join into that situation. So somebody, us, train your mind, find out who you are, so that when you do go out and mix with the rest of the world, you're on receive. You actually are receiving what's happening there. Not much of that is going on. Mostly it's feedback. You said this, I said this. But what do you think about what I'm thinking about what you're thinking? What do you think is right? Who should we vote for?
Maria Bang,
Go ahead, Maria.
what does it mean to be what is?
Find out. Look at everything you're objecting to. And how do you do that? Sit down, hold still, and watch. It'll keep coming and coming and coming. Let it wear out. If it does, it might wear out, it might not. There's no guarantee of anything. But what else are you going to do with your life? Find out who you are, so there's no doubt about it. So there's no either or situation happening. And so I'm saying to you, Maria, you've been doing this, near as I can tell, for the last number of years since I met you. Train your mind. Do the sitting practice of meditation. Interact with the concepts around this particular teaching, which is the Buddha's Dharma, 2,500-year tradition of people who have understood this and teach it. I was very lucky to meet someone like that. You may feel lucky or not. Shoot.
Question from Melissa in Portland.
Melissa in Portland. Yes.
Off the cushion, how can I stay with the reaction of discomfort when someone gets on my nerves or frustrates me? For example, at work or in a situation I can't just walk away from.
So first of all, you don't have to stay with it. You can actually, and the more you practice, do sitting meditation, and there's no guarantee here, but the more you actually work with being with the positive, negative, neutral that happens in the mind stream, the more your action in your everyday post-meditation or interaction with others will be less uncomfortable. I'm not saying you're going to get some kind of a merit badge about how well you're doing, but being able to be with the negative emotions that are triggered by others. No one's actually pouring any negative emotions in you. They may be doing things that are triggering that or bringing that up, but those emotions they're yours, in the sense that the mind stream that thinks it's somebody has a whole saddlebag full of stuff that's uninspected, because we've been busy doing what? Not going beyond discomfort. You go beyond discomfort, not when you're uncomfortable. You go beyond discomfort when you're comfortable. So going beyond comfort, going beyond discomfort. Does that sound confusing?
He has another question.
Go ahead.
What is voluntary suffering?
Simply put, voluntary suffering is, use it as a contrast. You've been living your life to do this. You want this, so you get some. You don't want that, so you stay away from that. And you want this, you get some more of that, but you don't risk anything. Make sure it's not going to cost you too much to do that. And then you might gamble on this or gamble on that, or whatever. So you're always going towards something that is better, tastes better, feels better, sounds better, thinks better, is better, looks better, better. And staying away from the things that you don't particularly want. So that doesn't always pay off so well. I mean, it can perhaps relatively, but death comes without warning. And this whole body-mind complex can come to an end, or you can lose your sight. You can lose lose a lot without even dying. You can lose a lot. So the voluntary suffering means that you're going to set time aside and sit down and get to know yourself. You're going to get to know on a deep level what's happening in your mind, and not just count on other people to get where you get your identity or your value and what they think about what you're thinking about what they're thinking, or to join some organization that supports you in some way. So voluntary suffering means you go and you sit down in front of a wall and hold still, and you're voluntarily being there, so you can begin to see in a deep way the nature of consciousness, which there's no solid being there. It's an incredible illusion to think there's someone who can be harmed. If you think you can be harmed, if you think that who you are actually can be harmed, I'm not saying you can't have your arm cut off. I'm not saying you can't lose your life, of course, but who are you fundamentally? Unless you can sit down and look deeply into the consciousness, you'll continue to grasp at a self and grasp at another, or reject the other and grasp at a self, or reject yourself and grasp at another. It's that kind of polarity happening all the time. And all you have to do is sit and have a conversation with anybody. You can feel your mind do that. And what we often try to do is try to stop feeling some ways and try to feel other ways. And if we can't stop it, we might actually start to blame somebody else for something, and actually believe that the other person is doing that, when actually it's your emotions that are being triggered. And to anyone who can see what this is, it's obvious. But they can't point it out to you because they have to respect your confusion. Somebody who is in the material world as a doctor or a psychiatrist or a therapist, and I'm not taking anything away from them. Some people, that's the only way they can do this, is through that kind of help. But quite often what happens there is if you get really intense, you're really upset, you're really having trouble, and there's no mind training, there's no one even talking about that. The next thing you know, you got somebody wanting to put drugs in you, put Wellbutrin or well, I can't name them all, but there's dozens of them, as you know, that modify how you feel, and it's just it covers up the very being that is trying to awaken. This doesn't mean, what I'm saying here doesn't mean that some people don't need some kind of medication because of chemical imbalances. Of course, that's probably happening. But there's never any kind of connection with trying to do it with the mind. We immediately go into, there's somebody with a thing on their wall, so they get to be the authority. That's why those of you who are therapists know that when I talk to you, I say, just be with people. You don't have to fix them. They just want somebody to talk to. That doesn't mean that listening to them, you might be giving them feedback in some way because you're on receive, because you train your mind, because you're not jumping to conclusions about what somebody should or shouldn't do or right or wrong, and you're willing to exist, your consciousness can be in an open dimension that doesn't have any particular positionality as far as right and wrong, up and down, sane or insane. Very, very important. People differentiate between that. Differentiation and desire. Differentiation, and then the desire for that, and the wanting to get rid of something else. You can actually live without knowing what to do next. because you're so clear about what is happening moment by moment by moment. It's called authentic presence, sometimes called pure appearance. You just see it. You don't need anything else but what's in front of you. Sokuzan.
You gave the example earlier of, I'm not saying don't take aspirin if you have a headache. Where does that mundane addressing a problem become avoiding discomfort?
That's why we do mind training, because the teaching person, he, she, or they are not going to be able to necessarily check on you every 10 minutes to see what you should do or shouldn't do. So this is why it's necessary to train your mind. So in the way I do this, the way I talk to people about it, is I say, don't do anything unless you have to. That's like anybody who's here who's wearing a rock suit, I've not encouraged them to do that. They have to come and not demand it, but be very, very adamant. I want to do this. I want to do this. Because I don't, the halfway situation doesn't work. And so you could do the same thing in your situation. Like I've got a headache. I need to take some aspirin, to use your example. There's lots of other examples that might be more extreme, not rather than just aspirin and a headache. You might need to talk. You might need to go to a psychiatrist. That may be necessary, but it would be good if you really had an idea of what was happening with your mind stream in your mind before you do that. And this isn't ruling out all the chemical things, the things in somebody's mind that could be through heredity or through whatever, any kind of contaminations that could cause someone's thinking process to go awry or make it somehow imbalanced. Of course, those are there too. We have to look at everything. But consciousness is not tied to or laminated to or attached to the organism of biology. Science looks at that and tries to find thoughts in a mind, and so they stick little. It's so primitive. They stick a little thing in there, and then you have a memory of being on a beach in 1942, and you weren't even alive then. They're searching for something. They want some kind of control. It's quite humorous. I'm on that beach all the time. More?
Maria bowing.
Yes, Maria.
If we are not that what is, are we the opposite to it? Bowing.
If we are not what is, are we the opposite of it?
Yes.
No, you're always what is. It's just that you think otherwise. That's why I'm here to help you. You'll let me. There is no, the polarity is imaginary. This is a parikalpita, imaginary nature. It's imaginary. The people who are on a Zoom screen who are sitting in darkened rooms, your glasses are reflecting your computer screen. It looks pretty spooky. There we go. It was a human being there. Hondo. Junchu.
Melissa asks, how do you go beyond discomfort while you are comfortable?
I wouldn't bother. If you're comfortable, just be comfortable. Going beyond comfortable, if you're comfortable, we're not looking for trouble. But that's not going to last. It's a relative situation, being comfortable. I like to be comfortable.
So your bowing is that sometimes you say the best time to learn how to ski is not in a snowstorm.
I do.
So is that similar?
Yeah, well, the way I say that, if I'm following the way you're asking, I'm saying you should meditation should happen on some kind of a schedule. It doesn't have to be every day. Be a good idea, but it doesn't have to be. But some kind of a situation where no matter how you feel, up, down, comfortable, not comfortable, you're going to go and sit down and look at the wall. You're going to go sit down, hold still, And it might be a day when it's comfortable. It might be a day when it's feels pretty ragged around the edges. You're going to do it anyway. And so if somebody's really having a difficult time, I would leave it up to you rather than say, well, you should go meditate. Maybe not. Maybe you should go make yourself comfortable. So it's not about some kind of a protocol where you're never comfortable or don't enjoy yourself. It's the attachment to it that seems to be cause spinning. Good time to do something else, yeah.
Yes.
Take one more question from wherever it wants to come from. Okay, thank you. We'll dedicate the merit. It's real unusual to be in the Mousetarium.
May the
Merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Chi ho san chi hi shi hu. Chi san mu sa mo ko sa. Mo ko hu ja ho ro ni. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light to protect SokukoJi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.